Hi everyone, welcome to this week's learning. The focus of your learning this week is really to be thinking about students using multiple texts to gain knowledge and new information. Our goal is really to think about what are those sources of information that students will be accessing. How will they gain new information? So typically when we think about students, we think about your typical textbook. And what does that look like for students? And so there are many unique challenges involved in using a textbook, and it can be anything from readability of the text, structure of the text, and is the data really current around textbooks? So as far as sources of information go, we really want to make sure that students have access to diverse information and diverse resources. So many of today's textbooks or resources come along with ebooks or electronic books to support textbooks. A lot of times they come with additional PowerPoints or supplementary electronic texts or interactive question and answers or polls or multi-resources that support textbooks, or some companies are offering electronic resources for students that target content information or address standards at certain grade levels. When we think about using electronic resources, we have to be careful that we consider equitable access for students. So, do all students have access to electronic or digital resources? What's the quality? Do they line up with our standards from our certain states? So if a resource is developed in a different state, they may have different grade levels, priorities, and standards. And what does the structure of that look like for students? So our teaching needs to be extremely explicit when we think about accessing structure, both in a textbook and in an ebook. How do students engage in that work? How do we support those metacognitive steps so that students understand that they have skills and strategies around that particular resource? What do they know about that? What's their prior knowledge? How do we teach them to engage with those types of resources? Over the past several years, we've focused to using trade books to really supporting accessing content knowledge, so that there are different structures to trade books. So again, thinking about structure, so there are narrative informational texts, there are some trade books use a question and answer structure, or main idea, topic detail structure, cause and effect structure. So students need to, again, have a deep understanding of structure and those metacognitive strategies in order to access these trade books. Students are extremely curious and engage with the use of trade books to support their content information. They're typically able to make choices. So choice, we know, plays a huge role in them selecting which books that they'd like to use to think deeply about a different point of view or perspective around a topic or personal narrative experience. So a lot of that work really supports our thinking in providing a different information for students. Again, additional digital resources, blogs, websites, articles. How are you creating the learning experience for students? It's important that we think about that. Are you creating a Symbaloo board where you're really creating some confines around what information students have to access? So in the lower grades, sometimes we don't want to research every single website, or we're worried about firewalls for students accessing information that they shouldn't be able to. So teachers sometimes feel like Symbaloo boards or websites that they've developed themselves really support targeting what information students are going to be looking at, in addition to blogs. Students also need opportunities to access information through short text, and in addition, primary sources. So is it pictures that we need to have students look at? Primary maps. What are the strategies to interact with primary sources? How do students feel? What's their self-efficacy around accessing primary sources or accessing the textbook? So we need to have students feel successful as they're engaging with different sources of information so that they understand what their work is prior to using a different resource, and then how they're going to interact with that information. It's critically important. Again, if we think about our role in really selecting high quality information, text that's really thought-provoking and aligns with our standards. And so I want to again think about thought-provoking. Students have access to so many resources, cell phones. They can find information that they could possibly just regurgitate facts. And we really want to move away from that and really have them connect ideas that magnify experiences and lenses into the world so that students feel empowered by the information that they gather from all of these sources to really connect and develop their own ideas. With that wide array of text, we want to be sure that students have opportunities to connect ideas and provide insights to contemporary issues. Texts that provide multiple point of views. What is the work that it takes for students to think about point of view? Why did the author write this particular text? What are their takeaways based on the author's perspective? And then as they engage with a wide array of texts, how do they use those multiple point of views and the information that they gather to be able to create their own insights around a topic? We want to be sure that the information is current and relevant to students. And again, thinking about opportunities for guided practice. So as students engage with different types of text and they're engaging in this type of work, how are we interacting with them? What are we doing to provide those types of models to support their comprehension as they're thinking about this? We want to make sure that they understand point of view so deeply, especially when it's informational text, that we build their comprehension strategies so that they can sift through the author's point of view to really uncover the deep lying informational researched facts so that they can connect those opportunities. And then really multiple opportunities for extended practice. How are we keeping our talk short and extending their opportunity to practice and show us those approximations in what they can do with the information and the work as we're moving forward. Finally, I want you to think critically about how students will access information. So simply assigning tasks to students is not really going to support their developmental learning. So what are those opportunities during our whole group work that we're providing those short lessons where students have opportunities to engage with one another, to turn and talk, and really focus on what their partners think as they're building content information? I think sometimes a trap that we fall into as educators is trying to provide all of the information at once and then trying to support students when their thinking isn't quite on target, and really thinking about across an entire unit as they develop their thinking, as they read more, as they learn more and think about different topics in a content area. How do those approximations change and shift, and what are those opportunities we have to engage with students? So what does that small group work really look like for students? How have you taken that teaching that you've done and supported those conversations in small groups so every student has an opportunity to really work in a reciprocal process with you? The groups are small enough where you have time to take notes and really listen to students, because in that whole group setting, it's hard for you to hear all student voices. And really in that small group, how have they access the information you've provided for them in the focus lesson, and how have you supported it in small groups? So what are some next steps for students as we're moving forward? And really thinking about the resources that we've selected. So what are those beyond the textbook? What are those trade books that we might be reading during interactive read aloud, and really connecting some of the ideas and what we present in our content area lessons. So not just presenting the information, but really selecting text that supports students in being explicit in our thinking, but also open to new perspectives and the way students are integrating and accessing knowledge and moving forward. And then what are those opportunities that the reciprocal process of reading and writing really helps students to sift through their thinking. So everything that they're reading and learning about and the notes that they're taking and stopping and jotting through all of these multiple texts and resources, how are they sifting through this knowledge to really craft new ideas? So we just finished really thinking about writing as an access for students to really support their thinking in reading. What are you providing for them? Are they flash drafting? Are they taking notes? Are they creating boxes and bullets to have new ideas? Are they conferring with partners and using partnership as a way to help them sift through content information and to learn? So the more opportunity we can provide for them to talk and listen and think about information, the more opportunities they'll have to grow and change their focus. So essentially, if we think moving forward, it's really about assessment, right? So how are we analyzing what students are engaging with in the whole group lesson? Are we listening to their turn and talk and not really trying to support all of the teaching at one time, but really thinking about what are those steps? What are the next steps that I have to take as an educator to support students? How can I shift that thinking in small groups? How can I shift that thinking during my interactive read aloud? And really, I think a core is student conferring, right? So really talking with students, understanding what concepts they've taken on. And so I know this is a difficult task to take on as you're thinking about all of what needs to happen in sometimes a very short amount of time in the upper grades. But if you can think through your week or a 2-week cycle in ways that you're going to continue to have access in a short amount of talk from the educator, and then pushing forward to small groups and trying to get collective either research groups or a lens of what platform would students possibly be creating their projects from. So are they using a Padlet? Are they using Google Slides? So what are they using during their small groups so they could support each other in that way? And perhaps they have a different lens on research or the content area that you're exploring. But then really thinking about when you're talking and listening to students, what are you really writing down through noticing that you're going to again teach in your focus lesson, or again teach in small groups, or perhaps model explicitly during your interactive read aloud, and really provide some exemplars for modeling as students are engaging in this work. So as you're thinking and reading through sort of the final portion of this course, really think about what are the takeaways? Where do you want to take the knowledge that you've gained in this class? And then how are you going to make it work in your context and in your environment?